The young heir, disgusted by his father's simplicity, tried to get rid of him quietly. But the family horse, witness to everything, took an action that made even the employees cry. The morning mist clung to the fields of Shelbyville like a reluctant ghost, not yet ready to surrender to the approaching dawn. Emma Conley's boots made soft squelching sounds against the damp ground as she made her way across the gravel path toward the Harrison stables. At 19, her slender frame already carried the weariness of someone much older, her shoulders slightly hunched beneath the weight of responsibilities that had come too soon. The stable's security light cast long shadows as Emma unlocked the side entrance. The familiar smell of hay, leather, and horses enveloped her, a scent that had been part of her life since before she could remember. She flicked on the lights and began her morning routine, her movements mechanical yet precise. Feed first, then water, then mucking out stalls. The work was hard but predictable, and in that predictability, Emma found a strange comfort. "Morning, beauties," she whispered to the row of expensive thoroughbreds who nickered softly in response. Her voice was the first human sound in the stable each day, arriving 2 hours before any of the trainers or grooms. These quiet moments belonged to her alone. As she worked, Emma's thoughts drifted to the stack of unopened envelopes on her kitchen table. Medical bills, mortgage notices, utility warnings. 3 months since the accident that took her parents, and the paperwork of death seemed endless. They had been driving home from their second jobs, her father falling asleep at the wheel after a 16-hour workday. The insurance company was still reviewing the case, which Emma had quickly learned was corporate language for finding ways to deny the claim. The memory of her grandmother Bessie rose unbidden as Emma filled water buckets. Bessie Conley had been born in 1921, the daughter of former slaves, on this very land. "This soil knows our blood," she used to tell Emma during their walks through these fields. "Our ancestors worked this ground when it wasn't fashionable Kentucky bluegrass. It was tobacco and cotton that broke their backs." Emma paused at Midnight Star's stall, a magnificent black mare who always seemed to sense when Emma's thoughts turned dark. The horse stretched her neck over the stall door, gently nudging Emma's shoulder. "I know, girl," Emma whispered, stroking the velvet muzzle. "I'm okay." But she wasn't, not really. Around Midnight Star, Emma couldn't pretend. The colors were all wrong. Instead of the usual calm blue shimmer that surrounded the mare, today Emma saw murky purples and grays swirling around her. The horse was anxious about something. That was Bessie's gift, passed down to Emma, the ability to see the emotions of horses as colors in the air around them. Bessie had explained it as spirits that had crossed the ocean with their ancestors, African deities who spoke through the animals. Emma had never known what to call it, only that since childhood, she had perceived horses differently than others did. Their emotions appeared to her as colorful auras, each feeling with its own distinct hue and pattern. "What's got you worried today, huh?" Emma murmured, scanning the stable for anything unusual. Everything seemed normal, but Midnight Star's anxiety was palpable in the violet swirls that intensified around her. The answer came with the sound of vehicles approaching, not the familiar trucks of the stable hands, but the purr of expensive engines. Emma glanced at her watch. 5:30 was too early for visitors. Curiosity drew her to the small office window that overlooked the main drive. 3 black SUVs followed by a gleaming silver Bentley rolled up the limestone driveway. Emma had heard the rumors for weeks. Willowbrook Farm, the historic property adjacent to the modest Conley homestead, had been sold to some Texas oil magnate. The vehicles confirmed it. The new owners had arrived. As if on cue, her phone buzzed with a text from Martha Jenkins, the stable manager. "New owners touring all properties today. Clean tack room ASAP." Emma sighed and hastened to finish her regular chores. The tack room was already clean. She'd done it yesterday, but she gave it another once-over anyway. By the time the stable doors swung open an hour later, she was polishing brass fittings that already gleamed. "And this is our main training stable," came a voice Emma recognized as James Porter, the property manager. 16 stalls, state-of-the-art ventilation, automatic waterers in each stall. Emma kept her head down as the group entered. From her peripheral vision, she could see an elderly man leaning on a cane, flanked by a younger man in an expensive suit whose resemblance marked him as a relation. The previous owners maintained an excellent breeding program, Porter continued. The bloodlines here are impeccable. Bloodlines are just paperwork until they perform, the younger man said dismissively. His voice carried the sharp edge of someone accustomed to being obeyed. We'll need to evaluate each animal individually. Emma continued polishing, trying to make herself invisible as they passed. But the elderly man paused near her, his breathing slightly labored from the tour. "Young lady," he called, his Texas drawl stretching the words. "You work here?" Emma straightened up, cloth still in hand. "Yes, sir. I'm Emma Conley." "William Harrison," the old man said with a nod. "This is my son, Malcolm." Malcolm Harrison gave Emma a cursory glance that seemed to categorize and dismiss her in the same moment. He checked his watch impatiently. "How long have you worked with these horses?" William asked. "All my life, sir. My family's property borders Willowbrook, just past the South Creek." Something in William's expression softened. "Conley. There was a Conley woman years ago, had quite a reputation with difficult horses. Any relation?" "My grandmother, Bessie Conley, sir." William nodded thoughtfully. "I heard stories about her when I was looking into this property. They said she could—" "Dad," Malcolm interrupted, "the transport will be here in 30 minutes. We need to finish the tour." The moment broken, William nodded and moved on, leaving Emma to her work. But the brief exchange had left her unsettled. Few people remembered Bessie's reputation anymore. Throughout the day, the stable buzzed with activity as staff prepared for what Porter called a very special arrival. Emma kept to herself, completing her tasks while trying to avoid the increasing number of people filling the usually quiet space. It was nearly sunset when the special transport arrived, a gleaming custom trailer pulled by a heavy-duty truck. Emma was sweeping the center aisle when the commotion began. "Everyone stand clear!" shouted a man in specialized handling gear. "This animal is unpredictable." The warning sent a ripple of tension through the gathered staff. Emma pressed herself against the wall as the trailer doors opened and 4 handlers attempted to guide a massive black thoroughbred down the ramp. "Easy, easy," one handler murmured, but the horse was having none of it. With a furious scream that didn't sound like any horse Emma had ever heard, the animal reared, nearly pulling 2 men off their feet. The colors around the horse hit Emma like a physical blow, not the red of anger as she might have expected, but a sickening yellow-green of pure terror. The horse wasn't aggressive, it was terrified beyond reason. "That's Tempest," whispered a groom standing near Emma. $5 million of pure nightmare. Won the Kentucky Derby 2 years ago, then witnessed his jockey get killed in a race. Been unmanageable ever since. Emma watched as the handlers struggled to force the massive animal into the specially prepared stall at the end of the aisle. Even at a distance, she could see the whites of his eyes, the foam flecking his coat where the sweat had lathered. William and Malcolm Harrison stood watching, the elder with concern, the younger with cold calculation. "This animal will be dompted or destroyed," Malcolm declared loudly enough for the staff to hear. "My father was foolish to purchase damaged goods out of sentimentality. I give it 2 weeks to show results." Emma flinched at the callousness in his tone. Across the stable, she caught William Harrison's expression, a mixture of determination and sadness. After the handlers secured Tempest in his stall with reinforced doors, the crowd slowly dispersed. Emma continued her evening chores, working her way down the aisle. As the stable emptied and dusk fell, she found herself alone with the sounds of horses settling in for the night. All except one. From the end stall came the sounds of distress, hooves pacing frantically, occasional thuds as Tempest threw himself against the walls. Emma approached cautiously, keeping a safe distance from the stall door. The colors surrounding Tempest were unlike any she'd seen, layers of that sickly yellow-green fear, shot through with black ribbons of something deeper. Trauma. Not just fear, but a fundamental breach of trust. Through the small window in the stall door, she could see the magnificent animal trembling in the corner, his coat gleaming with sweat despite the cool evening. Everyone else saw fury in those wild eyes, but Emma saw something else entirely. Absolute terror. The sound of raised voices from the main house pulled her attention away. Through the stable's open doors, she could see lights blazing in the Harrison mansion. Drawn by curiosity, Emma stepped outside. The voices grew louder as she approached, angry, masculine voices carrying through the night air. Moving silently across the lawn, Emma positioned herself in the shadow of a large oak tree. From there, she could see the second-floor balcony where two figures stood in heated argument. "You're throwing money away on a broken animal," Malcolm's voice cut sharply through the night. "$5 million for a horse that should have been put down after the accident." "That horse has heart," William responded, his voice weaker but equally determined. "And I won't have you dictating how I spend my money." "Your money?" Malcolm laughed bitterly. "The money I've tripled through my investments. The money that built this empire while you played cowboy." The argument escalated, their figures silhouetted against the bright interior lights. Emma gasped as she saw Malcolm advance on his father, backing the older man against the balcony railing. "You're becoming a sentimental old fool," Malcolm hissed, his hands gripping his father's shoulders. "Maybe it's time we discussed power of attorney." For a terrifying moment, William teetered against the railing, his balance precarious. He managed to push back just enough to stabilize himself, but the threat had been clear. From the end stall in the stable behind her, Emma heard Tempest whinny furiously, a sound so filled with distress that it sent chills down her spine. Somehow the horse had witnessed the confrontation too. Emma retreated quietly to the stable, her heart pounding. What she had just seen wasn't merely a family disagreement. It had been dangerous, threatening. The colors she'd glimpsed around Malcolm Harrison reminded her of the stallions that attacked weaker horses. Predatory, dominant, without empathy. The stable was silent now except for Tempest's continued pacing. Without fully understanding why, Emma found herself walking toward his stall. She sat down on an overturned bucket in the corridor, just outside his door but at a safe distance. Tempest continued his frantic movement, ignoring her presence. For over an hour, Emma simply sat in silence, watching the troubled animal wear a path in his bedding. The colors of his distress gradually shifted, still fearful, but with threads of curiosity beginning to appear as he occasionally glanced her way. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've seen terrible things too, haven't you? Too terrible to tell." At her words, Tempest stopped his relentless circling. For the first time since his arrival, the massive horse stood still, his ears flicking toward the sound of her voice. Slowly, cautiously, he approached the stall door. Emma remained motionless, making no attempt to reach toward him or make eye contact. She simply existed in his presence, offering nothing but quiet understanding. To the astonishment of anyone who might have witnessed it, the savage horse that had attacked every handler who approached him lowered his head to the level of Emma's eyes. There was no touch, no dramatic connection, just two broken souls recognizing one another in the shadows of a Kentucky stable. The connection that formed between Emma and Tempest that night lingered in the air like morning mist, fragile yet undeniable. For several moments, they remained locked in that silent exchange, the massive horse's dark eyes reflecting something Emma hadn't expected to find: recognition. When Emma finally rose to leave, hours after her shift had ended, Tempest stepped back from the stall door but kept his gaze fixed on her retreating figure. The colors surrounding him had shifted subtly, the sickly yellow-green of terror now threaded with the faintest blue of curiosity. Dawn found Emma back at the Harrison stables earlier than usual, anxiety prickling beneath her skin. She hadn't slept well, her mind replaying both the confrontation she'd witnessed on the balcony and the unexpected moment with Tempest. As she approached his stall, she was met with a wall of agitation. Overnight, handlers had attempted to place a halter on the horse, evident from the new scratch on one man's forearm, and the equipment thrown haphazardly outside the stall. "Wouldn't go near that devil if I were you," called one of the grooms, noticing her interest. Nearly took Johnson's hand off this morning. Emma nodded acknowledgement but didn't respond. The colors swirling around Tempest were chaotic, frantic, worse than yesterday. Whatever progress their quiet moment had created had been erased by the forceful handling attempts. "They're bringing in Blackwood tomorrow," the groom continued, clearly pleased to share the gossip. "Malcolm Harrison's paying triple his usual fee." Emma's stomach tightened. John Blackwood was infamous in Kentucky horse circles, a trainer who guaranteed results through methods that many considered unnecessarily harsh. Breaking the spirit to rebuild it, he called his approach. Throughout the day, Emma completed her tasks with mechanical precision while her mind worked on a different problem. When her shift ended in the late afternoon, instead of heading home, she found herself walking back toward Tempest's stall. The stable was momentarily empty, the perfect time. Settling on an overturned bucket in the corridor, a safe distance from the stall door but close enough to be seen, Emma simply sat in silence. Tempest paced aggressively, occasionally charging the door when she shifted position. "You're right not to trust them," Emma said softly after 20 minutes of silence. "I wouldn't either." The horse continued pacing but flicked an ear in her direction. "My Grandma Bessie would have understood you," she continued in the same gentle tone. "She always said horses remember everything, every kindness and every cruelty." A memory surfaced of herself at 7 years old, hiding in the hayloft of their small barn during a violent thunderstorm. Below, Bessie stood beside a trembling young colt, singing in a low, melodic voice that seemed to calm the frightened animal when nothing else would. Without thinking, Emma began to hum the same melody, a work song her grandmother had taught her, one born in cotton fields generations ago, created by slaves to endure the weight of the whip and endless labor. The simple, haunting tune filled the quiet stable. Tempest's pacing slowed, then stopped. He stood at the back of his stall, ears forward, listening. "Time only matters to those in a hurry," Emma murmured when she finished the song, focusing on cleaning the corridor rather than looking directly at the horse. "And you and I, we have all eternity, don't we? Nobody's waiting for us at home." She stayed another hour, sometimes humming, sometimes speaking softly about inconsequential things, but never approaching the stall door, never making demands. When she finally left, Tempest watched her go with wary attention rather than aggressive panic. Each evening after her shift ended, Emma returned to sit near Tempest's stall. Her technique contradicted everything the professional trainers attempted during daylight hours. Where they used force, she offered space. Where they imposed dominance, she provided choice. On the third evening, she deliberately left the stall door slightly ajar after the last handler departed, just enough that Tempest could push it open if he chose. The horse noticed immediately, approaching the door cautiously, sniffing the opening. But rather than bursting through to freedom, he simply stood there, watching as Emma sat on her bucket, reading aloud from an old paperback. "This is ridiculous," Malcolm Harrison's sharp voice sliced through the quiet atmosphere on the 5th evening of Emma's vigil. He stood at the stable entrance, clearly surprised to find the cleaning girl still present. "We're paying world-class trainers, and you think you can do better by singing to a dangerous horse?" Emma quickly stood, her heart racing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison, I was just—" "You were just overstepping," Malcolm interrupted, approaching with measured steps that reminded Emma of a predator stalking prey. "No uneducated black girl is going to dictate how we handle a $5 million investment." The words stung like a physical blow, but Emma kept her expression neutral, a skill learned through years of dealing with employers who saw her as less than human. "I meant no disrespect, sir." She gathered her things, preparing to leave. "I'll go now." "You'll go permanently," Malcolm replied coldly. "You're fired. I want you off this property in 10 minutes. "That won't be necessary, son." The voice came from the stable entrance where William Harrison stood, leaning heavily on his cane. His face, lined with age and experience, revealed nothing of his thoughts as he approached. "This girl has been interfering with our training program," Malcolm protested, gesturing dismissively toward Emma. "Blackwood arrives tomorrow, and he won't tolerate amateurs undermining his methods." William moved closer to Tempest's stall, noting how the horse watched them without the frantic aggression the handlers had reported. "The staff have been talking," he said thoughtfully. "They say this horse calms when Ms. Conley is near." "Superstitious nonsense," Malcolm scoffed. "Perhaps." William turned to Emma. "Would you mind showing me what you've been doing with Tempest?" Emma hesitated, acutely aware of Malcolm's glare. "I haven't been doing much, sir. Just sitting with him. Sometimes reading or singing." William gestured to the stall door, which remained slightly ajar. "And this?" "I thought maybe if he had the choice to leave but chose to stay, it might help build trust." Malcolm laughed derisively. "That's your revolutionary technique? Leaving a dangerous animal free to escape or injure someone?" William silenced his son with a raised hand. "Ms. Conley, would you mind demonstrating your approach? Just for a moment." Emma nodded and settled back onto her bucket, opening her book. She began to read in a soft, measured voice, a passage from To Kill a Mockingbird that she'd been sharing with Tempest over the past evenings. For several minutes, the 3 humans and 1 horse existed in a tableau of tension. Emma reading calmly, Tempest standing watchful but not aggressive, William observing with keen interest, and Malcolm barely containing his contempt. "Blackwood's methods haven't worked," William finally said, addressing his son. "Neither did the 3 trainers before him. Perhaps we should consider an alternative approach." "You can't be serious," Malcolm hissed. "This is a multi-million-dollar racehorse, not a therapy project." "It's my money," William replied with finality. "And right now, this multi-million-dollar racehorse is unusable. What do we have to lose?" He turned back to Emma. "Ms. Conley, I'd like to offer you a temporary position. 2 hours daily with Tempest after your regular duties. Same pay rate as your current position, in addition to your regular salary." Emma's surprise must have shown on her face because William added, "Your grandmother had quite a reputation with difficult horses. Perhaps that knowledge didn't die with her." "This is absurd," Malcolm muttered, but William ignored him. "Do we have an agreement, Ms. Conley?" Emma nodded, momentarily speechless. "Yes, sir. Thank you." "Good. We'll formalize it tomorrow." William turned to leave, adding, "Malcolm, I need to speak with you about the Lexington property." As the 2 men departed, Malcolm cast a final cold glare at Emma. "Sentiment is expensive, girl. Remember that." Alone again with Tempest, Emma released a shaky breath. The horse had remained calm throughout the confrontation, his attention divided between the men and Emma. The colors surrounding him showed wariness, but not the blind terror of previous days. "Well," she said softly to the horse, "I guess we have permission now." In the days that followed, Emma's approach remained consistent despite the official nature of her new role. She brought no equipment, made no attempts to halter or lead Tempest. Instead, she simply provided patient presence, sometimes reading aloud, sometimes singing softly, sometimes sitting in companionable silence. Word spread quickly among the stable staff. Grooms and exercise riders began finding reasons to pass by during Emma's sessions, pretending to check equipment or clean tack while stealing glances at the unusual training method. Martha Jenkins, the stable manager, became an unexpected ally, rearranging schedules to ensure Emma's sessions weren't interrupted. On the 7th day, Tempest took his first step toward Emma while she read. A small movement quickly reversed, but significant nonetheless. On the 10th day, he remained at the front of his stall throughout her visit, rather than retreating to the back corner. Progress came in tiny increments. Tempest accepting Emma's presence a foot closer than before, staying calm when she moved suddenly, pricking his ears forward when she arrived, rather than flattening them in fear. "Horses operate on different time than people," Emma explained to Martha when the manager expressed concern about the slow pace. "Especially horses who've had their trust broken. Rushing just proves you're another human who cares more about results than their feelings." The breakthrough came on the 14th day. Emma arrived for her evening session carrying a fresh apple, which she carefully placed on the ground between herself and the stall door after settling on her bucket. Throughout her reading, the apple sat untouched, a silent offering without pressure. When Emma finished the chapter and closed her book, Tempest approached the stall door, his movement deliberate but no longer fearful. With exquisite caution, he stretched his neck through the opening, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the apple. Emma remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe as the massive horse delicately took the fruit from the ground. Martha Jenkins, who had been quietly observing from the tackroom doorway, gasped softly at the sight. The sound startled Tempest, who retreated quickly into his stall, but the moment of connection had been established. "I've never seen anything like it," Martha whispered later as Emma prepared to leave. "Blackwood had 4 sessions with that horse, and couldn't get within 5 feet without him attacking." Emma shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. He just needed someone to listen instead of demand. That evening, as William Harrison reviewed the daily stable reports in his study, Martha's detailed account of the apple incident caught his eye. He sat back in his leather chair, considering the implications. Through the window, he could see Malcolm on the terrace below, arguing heatedly on his phone about oil futures and profit margins. William's gaze drifted beyond his son to the stable where a miracle was slowly unfolding. A miracle led by a young woman whose ancestors had worked this same land under very different circumstances. There was poetry in that, he thought, and perhaps a lesson about power and patience that his son had never learned. "You have 2 weeks to show real progress," Malcolm declared the next morning, cornering Emma outside the feed room, his cold eyes fixed on her. "But remember, girl, horses are property, not people. If this animal doesn't serve the purpose for which it was purchased, it will be treated like any other failed investment." Malcolm's words hung in the air like a storm cloud as Emma watched him stride away. 2 weeks. The deadline felt impossibly tight for the delicate work of rebuilding trust with a traumatized animal. She knew rushing would only destroy what little progress they'd made, yet the alternative, Tempest being treated like any other failed investment, was unthinkable. That evening, Emma sat at her kitchen table, bills spread before her like tarot cards foretelling a grim future. The final notice from the mortgage company glared up at her. 60 days overdue, foreclosure proceedings to begin if payment wasn't received within 2 weeks. The same deadline Malcolm had given Tempest. The irony wasn't lost on her. Emma pushed the papers away and rubbed her eyes. The small house, the only home she'd ever known, creaked softly around her, as if acknowledging her distress. Built by her grandfather's hands, it held generations of Conley history within its modest walls. Losing it would mean losing the last physical connection to her family. She moved to the bookshelf where an old, worn Bible sat. Opening it revealed a hidden compartment containing a leather-bound journal, her grandmother Bessie's diary. Emma had discovered it weeks after the funeral, tucked away as if waiting for the moment it would be needed most. The yellowed pages contained Bessie's careful handwriting, documenting her work with troubled horses through the decades. Between practical notes on technique were pressed herbs, sketches of plants, and recipes for teas that settle the troubled spirit of traumatized animals. "The language of fear is universal," one passage read. "A horse beaten by men will fear all men until one proves different. Patience is not waiting for something to happen. It is actively showing, day after day, that you are not what they fear." Emma traced her finger over a detailed drawing of meadowsweet and chamomile. Beside it, instructions for a calming tea that Bessie claimed speaks to the ancient memory in their blood. Her grandmother had integrated traditional African plant knowledge with generations of horse wisdom, creating remedies the local veterinarians dismissed as superstition. At dawn, Emma walked the edges of her property, gathering the herbs pictured in Bessie's journal. Morning dew soaked her jeans as she knelt in tall grass, carefully selecting leaves and flowers that matched her grandmother's drawings. The ritual connected her to Bessie in a way that transcended the years between them. A police cruiser slowed on the road beside her property, and Sheriff Lewis Coleman rolled down his window. At 55, the sheriff was a respected figure in Shelbyville's black community, one of the few who had broken through the racial barriers of local law enforcement. "Morning, Emma," he called. "Thought that was you out here. Everything all right?" Emma straightened, herbs clutched in her hand. "Yes, sir. Just gathering some plants." Coleman nodded, his expression thoughtful. Heard you're working with that new horse over at Harrison's place, the dangerous one. News traveled fast in small towns. Yes, sir. His name is Tempest. Your Grandma Bessie had a way with troubled horses, Coleman said, his tone nostalgic. My grandmother used to talk about it. Said Bessie could see colors around animals that told her what they were feeling. Emma stiffened slightly. Few people knew about that aspect of her grandmother's reputation. Coleman seemed to read her reaction. I was there that night, Emma. Outside the Harrison place. His voice lowered. Saw Malcolm with his father on that balcony. That wasn't no friendly conversation. Emma's heart quickened. You saw that? I did. Been keeping an eye on him since. Coleman's weathered face creased with concern. Just watch yourself around him. Men like Malcolm Harrison aren't used to being told no, and they don't like witnesses. As he drove away, Emma felt a chill despite the morning warmth. Sheriff Coleman had just confirmed what she already sensed. Malcolm was dangerous, and she had unwittingly become a complication in whatever game he was playing. Back home, Emma brewed the tea according to Bessie's instructions, carefully measuring each herb. The resulting liquid was earthy and fragrant, golden brown like autumn sunlight. She poured it into an old metal canteen, added a fresh apple from her small garden, and headed to the Harrison stables. Throughout her morning cleaning duties, Emma felt the weight of Malcolm's stare whenever he visited the stables. He said nothing, but his cold eyes followed her movements, calculating and resentful. The colors around him were sharp-edged and dark, predatory hues that made her skin crawl. When her regular shift ended, Emma began her session with Tempest. Following Bessie's instructions, she sprinkled a few drops of the herbal tea onto the apple, whispering words in a dialect her grandmother had taught her. Phrases passed down from ancestors who had crossed the ocean in chains but kept their spiritual knowledge intact. This opens the way between us, she murmured, placing the apple just inside Tempest's stall before settling on her bucket at a respectful distance. Tempest watched from the back corner, nostrils flaring as he caught the unusual scent. Emma opened Bessie's journal and began reading aloud, her voice soft and measured. She read passages about horses Bessie had rehabilitated, animals traumatized by abuse, neglect, or accidents like Tempest's. The stallion from Frankfurt refused food for 6 days, she read. On the 7th, I sat with him from sunrise to sunset, speaking only when spoken to, which meant silence, for a horse speaks with his body, not his voice. At dusk, he approached and took bread from my hand, not from hunger, but from recognition that I had given him what humans rarely offer, the dignity of choice. Emma glanced up to find Tempest had moved closer, his attention fixed on her voice. The colors around him had shifted, the sickly yellow-green now threaded with ribbons of curious blue and attentive purple. He hadn't taken the apple, but he'd moved within 5 feet of it, closer than he'd allowed any human since his arrival. Outside the stall, Emma noticed Martha Jenkins watching discreetly from the tack room doorway. The stable manager gave a small nod of approval before slipping away. Other staff members found reasons to pass by, checking water buckets, inspecting tack, sweeping already clean floors, each stealing glances at the unusual scene. Day after day, Emma continued this pattern. The herbal tea, the apple offering, reading from Bessie's journal, or singing songs her grandmother had taught her. Tempest's progress came in microscopic increments, standing slightly closer each day, watching her with gradually decreasing tension, sometimes bowing his head as if pondering her words. A week into the new routine, Emma arrived to find Malcolm engaged in a heated argument with Martha Jenkins near Tempest's stall. "This girl is wasting valuable time," Malcolm snapped, gesturing toward Emma as she approached. "Blackwood could be making real progress instead of this, whatever this is." "Mr. Harrison, your father, specifically authorized her approach," Martha replied firmly, "and I've seen more improvement in the past week than in the month before." Malcolm turned to Emma, his expression contemptuous. "My father may indulge this nonsense, but I won't. That animal needs discipline, not coddling." "With respect, Mr. Harrison," Emma said quietly, Discipline only works when there's trust. Tempest doesn't trust humans because humans betrayed him. Betrayed him? Malcolm's laugh was sharp. It's a horse, not a spurned lover. Someone gave him drugs before his last race, Emma continued, gathering courage from Bessie's words in her mind. He was pushed beyond his natural limits, which caused the accident that killed his jockey. He associates men with that betrayal and trauma. Malcolm's face hardened. And where did you get that particular information? It's public record, Emma replied, though it wasn't entirely true. She'd pieced it together from news articles and Martha's reluctant confirmation. The investigation found his former trainer responsible. Something dangerous flickered in Malcolm's eyes. Stick to cleaning stalls, girl. Leave the psychological analysis to those qualified to make it. After Malcolm stormed off, Martha approached Emma with a worried expression. Be careful what you say around him. Malcolm has connections to people in the racing world, some not entirely reputable. That evening, Emma sat inside Tempest's stall for the first time. A calculated risk, but one that felt right. She positioned herself against the wall farthest from the horse, reading aloud from Bessie's journal as usual. Tempest watched her cautiously, but without aggression, maintaining his distance while clearly listening to her voice. My grandma would have understood you, Emma said softly, closing the journal. She knew what it meant to be feared for what others did to you. Tempest's ears flicked forward at the change in her tone. Did you know her family wasn't allowed to ride horses after emancipation? Emma continued. White folks were afraid if black people had horses, they could travel too far, organize, escape. A black person on horseback was seen as dangerous, a threat to the established order. She smiled sadly. So you and I, we're both dealing with the weight of history that isn't our fault. Things done to our ancestors that still shape how the world sees us. As darkness fell outside, stable hands finished their work and departed. Through the open stable doors, Emma could see lights blazing in the Harrison mansion on the hill. A small gathering was underway. Expensive cars lined the circular drive, and the sounds of a string quartet drifted down to the stables. Emma continued talking softly to Tempest, sharing stories from Bessie's journal. She didn't notice the elegant figure standing in the stable doorway until a polite cough interrupted her monologue. She turned to find an elderly white woman watching her with keen interest. Despite her advanced age, easily in her 80s, the woman stood straight-backed and dignified, her silver hair arranged in an elegant chignon, her clothing clearly expensive though understated. I hope I'm not interrupting, the woman said, her accent pure old Kentucky aristocracy. I'm Martha Whitfield. Emma quickly stood, recognizing the name of the Harrison family's longtime rival and owner of the largest horse breeding operation in the county. Ms. Whitfield, I'm Emma Conley. I know who you are, child. Martha Whitfield's shrewd eyes moved from Emma to Tempest, who watched the newcomer warily, but without his usual panic. The stable hands at my place talk of nothing else these days. The girl who's gentling the killer horse with songs and patience. Emma flushed, uncomfortable with the attention. I'm just trying a different approach. Indeed. Martha moved closer, studying Tempest with professional assessment. I recognize those techniques. I haven't seen them used in 50 years, not since your grandmother. Emma stared in surprise. You knew my grandmother Bessie? My grandmother knew her quite well. Martha's expression softened with memory. They were friends, when such friendships could cost them both dearly. Catherine Whitfield and Bessie Conley, a white plantation owner's granddaughter and a former slave's daughter. Quite the scandal in the 1930s. Emma struggled to process this unexpected connection. I never knew. Few did. They kept their friendship private for safety's sake. Martha's gaze returned to Tempest. During the Great Flood of '37, when the Ohio River submerged half the county, most white landowners fled to higher ground, abandoning their livestock. Bessie Conley saved the finest horses in the region, including my family's prized stallions. Martha stepped closer to the stall, and to Emma's astonishment, Tempest did not retreat. My grandmother said Bessie could see the colors of a horse's feelings, blue for calm, Red for anger, green for fear. She said it was African magic that crossed the ocean with her ancestors. Emma felt exposed, as if this elegant stranger had peered directly into her most private self. People called her superstitious. People fear what they don't understand. Martha smiled slightly. I see you using her methods, the herbs, the songs, the patient presence, and I see them working on a horse everyone else had written off. Their conversation was interrupted by William Harrison's voice from the stable entrance. Martha Whitfield, this is an unexpected pleasure. The elderly woman turned, her posture straightening imperceptibly. William, I was just meeting Ms. Conley and her remarkable project. William approached, leaning on his cane. Despite the obvious tension between the two aristocrats, their exchange remained cordial, two adversaries with enough mutual respect to maintain civility. Emma has made remarkable progress with Tempest, William said, his tone genuinely proud. More than any of our professional trainers. I'm not surprised, Martha replied. She comes from good stock. Bessie Conley knew horses better than anyone in this county, myself included. After a brief exchange about local breeding lines, Martha turned back to Emma. My library contains texts on horse psychology and traditional healing methods from around the world, some quite rare. You're welcome to visit and use them for your work. The offer stunned Emma. The Whitfield Library was legendary among horse people, a collection built over generations that included texts unavailable anywhere else in the country. That's very generous, she managed. Not generosity, pragmatism. What you're doing here could change how we approach trauma in horses. Martha's keen eyes flicked toward William, and perhaps how we value different kinds of knowledge. After Martha departed, William lingered, watching Emma with Tempest. She doesn't invite many people to her library. Martha Whitfield has been my competitor for 40 years, but her eye for horse talent is unmatched. He seemed about to say more when his phone rang. Checking the caller ID, his expression tightened. I need to take this. Good night, Emma. Alone again with Tempest, Emma reflected on the unexpected connections revealed tonight. Her grandmother and the Whitfield family. The hidden history that linked them all together through these horses and this land. She opened Bessie's journal again, turning to a passage she'd read many times. A pressed meadowsweet flower fell from between the pages, its dried petals still fragrant after decades. A horse carries the memory of every hand that has touched him, she read aloud to Tempest. Our job is not to make him forget, but to give him new memories strong enough to stand beside the old ones. In the office of the Harrison mansion, Malcolm Harrison ended his phone call, his expression darkening. Yes, she's still working with the horse. No, nobody knows. Listen, you were paid to keep your mouth shut about that race, so I suggest you continue doing so, or we'll have to resolve this more permanently. Malcolm's threatening words echoed in Emma's mind as she drove home that night, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. The connection between Malcolm and Tempest's former trainer suggested something far more sinister than mere coincidence. If Malcolm had been involved in the doping scandal that led to the fatal accident, it would explain his determination to see Tempest destroyed. The horse was living evidence of his wrongdoing. The following morning brought clarity and purpose to Emma's work. The truth about Tempest's trauma had crystallized overnight. His violent reactions weren't random aggression but targeted fear. During his morning feeding, Emma observed how he reacted differently to Martha Jenkins compared to the male grooms, tense vigilance versus active hostility. The pattern was unmistakable. He doesn't hate people, Emma explained to Martha as they watched Tempest from a safe distance. He hates men who remind him of the trainer who betrayed him. Martha nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. He associates men with the pain of the drugs and the chaos of the accident. Exactly. But knowing why he's afraid doesn't automatically fix the fear. In the afternoon, Emma arrived for her session with Tempest, carrying a worn leather halter, the lightest, softest one she could find in the tack room. She placed it on the ground inside his stall, making no attempt to approach him with it. Instead, She sat with Bessie's journal and continued reading aloud from her grandmother's experiences. "The gray mare from Tennessee," she read, "had been beaten with the very lead rope meant to guide her. So I left ropes lying about her stall for a week, never touching them, until they became just another part of her surroundings rather than instruments of pain." Tempest stood in the far corner, but his posture had changed over the past weeks. Head higher, ears forward, the whites of his eyes less visible. The colors around him had shifted too, the sickly yellow-green of terror now marbled with threads of curious blue and cautious lavender. Emma continued reading, keeping her voice low and rhythmic. From his office window overlooking the stables, William Harrison observed the scene with growing interest. He'd reviewed the security footage from the previous night and had seen the curious interaction between Emma, Martha Whitfield, and Tempest. The horse's relative calm in the presence of both women supported Emma's theory about his gender-specific trauma. William made his way down to the stables, moving carefully with his cane. He paused outside Tempest's stall, maintaining a respectful distance as he watched Emma work. "You were right," he said quietly when she finished a passage. "He doesn't react to you or Martha the way he does to men." Emma closed the journal. "It's not just gender, sir. It's about association. The men who hurt him were probably around his size, with similar voices and movements." William nodded, the lines in his weathered face deepening with thought. "Can I observe for a while?" "Of course, but—" Emma hesitated. "Maybe from outside the stall? Your presence doesn't frighten him as much as younger men, but it's still new." For the next half hour, William watched in silence as Emma continued her gentle approach. She never moved directly toward Tempest, never tried to touch him. Instead, she created a space where he could choose to approach or retreat without judgment. "Malcolm doesn't understand this approach," William finally said. "He sees horses as assets to be managed, not beings with their own internal lives." "That perspective can work with some horses," Emma replied diplomatically. "Just not with ones who've been traumatized." William's expression grew distant. "My son has always valued control above all else. Even as a child, he broke his toys rather than share them." He shook his head slightly. "I should let you continue. Thank you for allowing me to observe." After William departed, Emma turned her attention back to Tempest, who had remained watchful but calm throughout the conversation. "See? Not all men are the same," she said softly. "Some can listen and learn." Over the next few days, Emma made slow but measurable progress with Tempest. The halter remained untouched in his stall, but he no longer showed anxiety at its presence. During one session, Emma began humming softly as she sat near the stall door, the same work songs her grandmother had taught her. Tempest's response was immediate. His ears flicked forward, his breathing slowed, and the colors around him shifted toward deeper blues of calm. On the 10th day after Malcolm's ultimatum, Emma achieved a breakthrough. While reading from Bessie's journal, she gradually inched closer to where Tempest stood. For the first time, the massive horse didn't retreat. Instead, he lowered his head slightly, nostrils flaring as he took in her scent more deliberately. "You're starting to believe I might be different," Emma murmured. "That's good. That's the first step." With exquisite slowness, she raised her hand, palm open, not reaching toward him but simply offering the possibility of contact. Tempest regarded her hand warily, the muscles in his neck tense with indecision. Minutes passed in perfect stillness. Then, in a moment that brought tears to Emma's eyes, Tempest stretched his neck forward and briefly, just for a second, allowed his muzzle to brush against her fingers. The contact lasted only a moment before he pulled back, but it represented a monumental shift. Emma remained perfectly still, fighting the urge to celebrate or push for more. "Thank you for trusting me," she whispered, lowering her hand slowly. When she left the stall, she found Martha Jenkins waiting outside with an expression of disbelief. "He touched you voluntarily," the stable manager said. "I've never seen anything like it." Word of the breakthrough spread quickly through the stable staff. The following day, Emma arrived to find a small gathering of workers lingering near Tempest's stall, exercise riders, grooms, even the farrier who had refused to work with the killer horse. They dispersed quickly when they saw her, but their curious glances conveyed their interest. "They've been watching you," Martha explained later. "Everyone wants to know how you're doing what Blackwood couldn't with all his equipment and aggressive methods." That evening, Sheriff Coleman visited Emma at her small house. He sat at her kitchen table, his large hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, his expression troubled. "I've been asking around about Malcolm Harrison," he said without preamble. "Man's got a reputation in racing circles, not a good one." Emma nodded, unsurprised. "I think he knew Tempest's former trainer, the one responsible for the doping. More than knew him, bankrolled him." Coleman leaned forward. "According to my sources, Malcolm had a silent partnership in that racing stable. When the doping scandal broke, he managed to keep his name out of it." Emma felt a chill despite the warm evening. "So when his father bought Tempest, Malcolm saw a living reminder of his biggest legal vulnerability," Coleman finished. "A horse that connects him to a scandal that could ruin him if it ever came to light. That's why he's so determined to have Tempest declared dangerous and put down," Emma realized. "It's not about the money. It's about eliminating evidence." "Be careful, Emma," Coleman warned. "Men like Malcolm Harrison don't let anything stand in their way, especially not people they consider beneath them." After the sheriff left, Emma sat on her porch, watching fireflies rise from the grass as darkness fell. The enormity of what she'd stumbled into weighed heavily on her. Tempest wasn't just a traumatized animal. He was unwitting evidence in a scandal that could destroy Malcolm Harrison's reputation and possibly lead to criminal charges. The next morning, Emma was surprised to find a young Latina woman waiting near the stable entrance. Slender and intense, with grief etched into her features despite her youth, she introduced herself as Lisa Martinez. "My brother was Daniel Martinez," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "He was Tempest's jockey, the one who died." Emma's heart constricted. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Lisa shook her head. "I'm not here for condolences. Sheriff Coleman said you're working with Tempest, helping him recover. I wanted to see for myself." During her break, Emma brought Lisa to Tempest's stall. The horse recognized a new presence immediately, his posture tensing with wariness. But when Lisa spoke softly in Spanish, Tempest's ears pricked forward with what seemed like recognition. "Daniel used to talk to him in Spanish during training," Lisa explained, tears welling in her eyes. "He said Tempest was the most responsive horse he'd ever ridden, until that last race." "What happened?" Emma asked gently. "Daniel called me the night before. He was worried about Tempest, said the horse seemed off, nervous in a way he'd never been. He told the trainer, but..." Lisa's voice hardened. "They had too much money riding on that race. The trainer told him to shut up and ride." Emma absorbed this new information. "You don't blame Tempest for what happened." "How could I? My brother and this horse, they were both victims." Lisa wiped her eyes. "The investigation found doping in Tempest's system. The drugs made him unpredictable, caused him to stumble. Daniel never had a chance. I'm trying to help him trust again," Emma said. "It's slow work." Lisa nodded. "Daniel would want that. He loved this horse." She hesitated. "There's something else you should know. The investigation was shut down prematurely. My family received a large settlement with a non-disclosure agreement. Someone powerful wanted the whole thing buried quickly. Malcolm Harrison," Emma said softly. Lisa's eyes widened slightly. "You know, I'm starting to put the pieces together." As they spoke, William Harrison approached the stall, his expression softening at the sight of Tempest standing calmly, despite the presence of visitors. "Ms. Conley," he greeted Emma before turning to Lisa. "I don't believe we've met." "This is Lisa Martinez," Emma explained, "Daniel Martinez's sister." Understanding dawned in William's eyes. "Ms. Martinez, I'm deeply sorry about your brother. His accident was a tragedy that should never have happened." Lisa studied the older man. "You're not what I expected, Mr. Harrison." "The Harrison who bought Tempest or the Harrison who wants him destroyed?" William asked shrewdly. Both, I suppose. William sighed heavily. My son and I have different perspectives on many things, including responsibility and redemption. He turned to Emma. Speaking of which, I've been reviewing your progress reports. Martha tells me you've achieved physical contact. Emma nodded. Brief, but voluntary. He's beginning to trust. Excellent. I'd like to extend your deadline indefinitely. William's expression turned resolute. Malcolm will object, of course, but this is still my decision to make. After William departed, Lisa turned to Emma with renewed purpose. I need to show you something. Not here. It's not safe. Can you meet me after work? When everyone left the stable, Emma found Lisa Martinez waiting in the shadows. We need to talk privately, Lisa whispered urgently. I discovered something about my brother's accident, and about Malcolm Harrison. He knew Tempest's former trainer, and I think he knew about the drugs long before buying the horse. Lisa's eyes darted nervously as she led Emma away from the stables toward a small grove of oak trees that bordered the Harrison property. The setting sun cast long shadows across the rolling Kentucky landscape, painting everything in warm amber hues that belied the gravity of their conversation. I didn't want to say this where anyone might overhear, Lisa said once they were safely hidden among the trees. After Daniel died, I started digging. The official investigation blamed the trainer, Vincent Morelli, but I knew there had to be more to it. She pulled a manila envelope from her bag and extracted several photographs. The first showed Daniel smiling beside Tempest after a victory, the horse's coat gleaming with health, his eyes bright and confident. The second showed Daniel with Morelli and several investors celebrating in a winner's circle. Emma's breath caught when she recognized Malcolm Harrison in the background, partially obscured but unmistakable. He was there, Emma whispered, with Tempest's former trainer. Not just there, Lisa said grimly. He was a silent investor in Morelli's stable. After the accident, when the doping allegations surfaced, Malcolm's lawyers worked overtime to keep his name out of the official reports. Our family's settlement came with ironclad NDAs. We couldn't mention his involvement without facing financial ruin. Emma connected the pieces aloud. He wants Tempest declared dangerous and destroyed because the horse is a living reminder of his involvement in a criminal scandal. Exactly. If the full story ever came out, that Malcolm knew about and possibly encouraged the doping that killed my brother, it would destroy not just his reputation but potentially lead to criminal charges. Lisa's voice hardened. The worst part? His father buying Tempest was completely unexpected. It put Malcolm in proximity to the one animal that connects him directly to the scandal. Emma felt a chill despite the warm evening. The stakes had risen dramatically. She wasn't just trying to save a traumatized horse, she was unwittingly challenging a powerful man's attempt to bury evidence of his crimes. The next morning, Emma approached Tempest's stall with renewed determination. The magnificent black horse watched her entrance with the cautious attention that had replaced his earlier terror. He no longer retreated to the far corner when she appeared, instead standing midway in his stall, head held high but not defensively so. "Morning, Tempest," she said softly, setting down her equipment. "We have a lot of work to do today." With careful movements, Emma prepared a light cotton halter, softer and less threatening than the leather one she'd introduced earlier. She placed it on the ground inside his stall, making no attempt to approach him with it. Instead, she simply sat on her bucket and opened Bessie's journal. "Today we're going to try something new," she explained, as if Tempest understood every word. Perhaps he did, in his way. The colors surrounding him had shifted noticeably over the past weeks, the sickly yellow-green of terror now interwoven with curious blue and attentive purple. There were still flashes of red alarm when men approached, but with Emma, the colors had stabilized into something approaching calm. She began humming softly, a melody Bessie had taught her, one her grandmother claimed had traveled across the ocean from Africa, passed down through generations of women who had found ways to communicate with animals when their own voices were silenced by oppression. Tempest's ears flicked forward, his attention completely focused on Emma. Gradually, she began to move in a slow circular pattern around the stall, never approaching directly but creating a gentle rhythm with her movement and voice. This was another of Bessie's techniques, the dance of approach, she had called it in her journal. Not predator stalking prey, but two beings moving in harmony, establishing a shared language of respect. After 30 minutes of this careful dance, Emma picked up the halter, still humming. Tempest tensed but didn't retreat. With exquisite patience, she extended her arm, offering the halter for his inspection without attempting to place it on him. The horse stretched his neck cautiously, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the unfamiliar object. "This is just between us," Emma murmured. "No pressure, no demands." To her amazement, Tempest lowered his head slightly. Not enough for her to put the halter on, but a clear acknowledgement of her offer. It was a tiny gesture that represented a monumental shift in trust. Outside the stall, William Harrison watched silently, his weathered face thoughtful. He had been observing Emma's sessions with increasing frequency, clearly fascinated by her unconventional approach. When Emma emerged from the stall 30 minutes later, he was waiting. "Remarkable progress," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "The way you move around him, it's unlike any training method I've seen." "It's not really training, sir," Emma replied. "It's conversation. I'm learning his language as much as he's learning mine." William nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding his fear of men. I watched the security footage from the past week. He reacts differently to different people, worst with young men who resemble his former trainer, better with women and older men like myself." "Yes, sir. Trauma creates specific triggers, not generalized fear." William gestured toward the main house. "Would you join me for lunch? I'd like to discuss some ideas about Tempest's future." Emma hesitated, acutely aware of her work clothes and the stable dust that clung to her skin. "I'm not really dressed for—" "Nonsense," William interrupted gently. "It's just lunch, not a formal affair." The Harrison mansion was as imposing inside as out, with soaring ceilings and antique furniture that spoke of old money and careful preservation. William led Emma to a sunny conservatory overlooking the training paddocks, where a simple lunch had been laid out. As they ate, William shared his vision for transforming part of Willowbrook Farm into a rehabilitation center for traumatized horses. The west wing of the property has been unused for years. It has separate stables, paddocks, even a small residence. I've been thinking it would be perfect for specialized care." Emma listened with growing amazement as William outlined a program remarkably similar to what she'd imagined in her own daydreams. "That sounds wonderful, but it would require specialized staff, funding." "Yes, it would," William agreed, his eyes twinkling. "Which is why I've been revising my will. I want to ensure that part of my estate is dedicated to this purpose after I'm gone, including provisions that Tempest will never be sold or destroyed." He paused, studying Emma's reaction. "I'd like you to be involved, Emma, officially, as coordinator of the program." Emma nearly choked on her iced tea. "Mr. Harrison, I'm flattered, but I don't have formal qualifications. I'm just a young woman with an extraordinary gift and wisdom beyond your years," William finished firmly. "Degrees can be earned. What you have can't be taught." As Emma walked back to the stables, her mind reeled with the implications of William's offer. A real job doing work she loved, not just cleaning stables, financial security, a chance to help other horses like Tempest. The news about "the girl who tames the killer horse" had spread beyond the Harrison property. As Emma resumed her afternoon session with Tempest, she noticed several unfamiliar trucks parked discreetly along the fence line. Workers from neighboring farms had begun gathering during their lunch breaks to watch her work, sitting quietly on tailgates or leaning against fence posts. Emma felt self-conscious at first, but soon focused entirely on Tempest, who seemed increasingly responsive to her presence. By the end of the session, she had managed to stand directly beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his powerful body. He hadn't allowed her to touch him again since that brief moment days ago, but his willingness to share space represented enormous progress. As darkness fell and the farm quieted, Emma was surprised to see Malcolm's sleek Porsche pull into the stable yard. He had been conspicuously absent since William extended her deadline, and his sudden appearance set alarm bells ringing. The colors surrounding him were sharp and dark, predatory hues that made her skin crawl. Still playing horse whisperer? He asked, his voice deceptively light as he approached Tempest's stall. My father seems quite taken with your little sideshow. Emma maintained a neutral expression. Tempest is making good progress, Mr. Harrison. So I hear. Malcolm leaned against the stall door, his expensive cologne cutting through the stable smells. Tell me, did your grandmother's magical horse-talking powers include seeing the future? Because I'm curious if you can see yours. The threat hung in the air between them. Emma stood her ground, meeting his cold gaze. I'm just doing the job your father hired me to do. Yes, about that. Malcolm's smile didn't reach his eyes. My father may own this property, but I manage the finances. Effective immediately, your sessions with Tempest will be limited to 30 minutes daily. Budget constraints. Before Emma could protest, the sound of tires on gravel interrupted them. A vintage Rolls-Royce pulled into the yard, and Martha Whitfield emerged, elegant despite her advanced age. Malcolm Harrison, she called, her aristocratic voice carrying clearly. I thought I recognized that ridiculous car of yours. Compensating for something, are we? Malcolm's expression tightened. Mrs. Whitfield, this is Harrison property, private business. Is it? How interesting. Martha approached with regal confidence. I was just coming to collect Miss Conley. We have an appointment to discuss some historical materials in my library. Emma blinked in confusion. They had no such appointment, but quickly recovered. Yes, ma'am. I was just finishing up here. Malcolm looked between them, clearly suspicious, but unwilling to create a scene with Martha Whitfield, whose family had been Kentucky aristocracy when the Harrisons were still wildcatters in Texas dust. Another time, then, he said to Emma, the warning in his voice unmistakable before he strode back to his car. Once he was gone, Martha turned to Emma with a conspiratorial smile. I thought you might need an extraction. That man has the same look his mining company gives land they're about to strip bare. Thank you, Emma said sincerely. He was threatening you. Yes, I gathered that. Martha glanced toward Tempest's stall. Now, since I've created this fictional library appointment, we might as well make it real. I wasn't entirely truthful before. I didn't come just to rescue you. I've been watching your work with Tempest from a distance. Your techniques are remarkable, but I think I might have some resources that could help. In Martha's car, Emma explained what she'd learned from Lisa Martinez about Malcolm's connection to the doping scandal. The elderly woman listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grave. That explains much, she said finally. Malcolm's determined efforts to discredit Tempest go beyond simple financial considerations. He's afraid of exposure. At the Whitfield estate, Martha led Emma to an impressive library filled floor to ceiling with books on equine medicine, behavior, and training methods from around the world. My family has collected these for generations, Martha explained, running her fingers along leather-bound spines, including some that mainstream veterinary science has dismissed as folklore. She pulled down a worn volume. This documents traditional horse healing practices from Africa, brought to America during slavery. Some of your grandmother's methods are described here, techniques that were dismissed as superstition by white veterinarians, but preserved by black horsemen who knew their value. Emma accepted the book reverently. I had no idea these practices were documented. Knowledge doesn't cease to exist simply because the powerful ignore it, Martha replied. Your grandmother understood that. She combined these ancestral techniques with keen observation and natural intuition, just as you're doing with Tempest. As they sat in Martha's study, surrounded by centuries of accumulated knowledge, Emma felt a strange sense of coming home, as if the wisdom of her ancestors had been waiting here for her all along. Why are you helping me? She asked finally. The Whitfields and Harrisons have been rivals for generations. Martha's eyes twinkled. True, but some things transcend old feuds. What you're doing with that horse. It reminds me of Catherine and Bessie's friendship. Two women from different worlds who recognized something valuable in each other that others couldn't see. Before Emma left, Martha made an unexpected offer. William told me about his plans for a rehabilitation center. It's a worthy project, but he's not a young man, and Malcolm will fight it every step of the way. If you'd like a fallback position, a place to continue your work regardless of what happens at Willowbrook, my North Pastures would welcome you and Tempest. In the office of the Harrison mansion, Malcolm ended his phone call, his expression darkening. Yes, she's still working with the horse. No, nobody knows. Listen, you were paid to keep your mouth shut about that race, so I suggest you continue doing so, or we'll have to resolve this more permanently. The last words of Malcolm's phone conversation clung to the air like smoke as he terminated the call. He tossed the phone onto his desk and swiveled his chair toward the window where he could see the stable yard in the distance. His hands clenched involuntarily at the sight of Emma crossing from the main stable to Tempest's isolated stall, carrying what appeared to be an old guitar case. Over the next few days, Malcolm intensified his efforts to undermine Emma's work. The changes began subtly. Her time card showed fewer hours than she'd worked. Her paychecks shrank with vague explanations of accounting adjustments. When she questioned Martha Jenkins about the discrepancies, the stable manager could only shrug helplessly. Direct orders from Malcolm, Martha explained, genuine regret in her eyes. He's claiming budget reassessments for the entire operation. Emma swallowed her frustration. The reduced pay hurt, especially with the mortgage company's final notice sitting on her kitchen table, but she couldn't afford to lose this job completely. Not when Tempest was making such progress, not when he needed her. The harassment escalated in small, calculated ways. Emma arrived one morning to find her scheduled time with Tempest reduced by half, with a typed note citing operational efficiency requirements. The following day, her access to certain areas of the stable was restricted, forcing her to take a longer route to Tempest's stall. "It's like death by 1,000 cuts," she confided to Martha Whitfield during one of their evening sessions in the older woman's library. "He's not firing me outright, but he's making everything harder." Martha nodded, her aristocratic features set in lines of disapproval. Classic tactics. Men like Malcolm don't confront directly unless forced. They prefer to squeeze until you leave voluntarily. The next blow came in the form of unannounced expert evaluations. Emma arrived for her session with Tempest to find a stern-faced man in an expensive suit waiting beside Malcolm. "This is Dr. Peterson," Malcolm announced with a cold smile. "One of the foremost equine behavioral specialists on the East Coast. He'll be observing your session today to provide a professional assessment." The interruption couldn't have come at a worse time. Emma had been making breakthrough progress with Tempest using music therapy, playing her grandmother's old guitar while sitting in his stall. The horse had shown remarkable responsiveness to certain melodies, particularly the old work songs Bessie had taught Emma. Yesterday, Tempest had stood beside Emma for nearly 30 minutes as she played, his body relaxed, occasionally lowering his head to exhale softly near her shoulder, the closest he'd come to voluntary physical contact in days. Now, with strangers watching, the careful rhythm of trust building was shattered. Dr. Peterson spoke loudly, moved suddenly, and positioned himself directly in Tempest's line of sight. The horse retreated to the corner of his stall, the colors around him flaring with anxiety, sharp oranges and that sickly green returning after weeks of progress. "Perhaps you could demonstrate your method more actively," Dr. Peterson suggested, his tone making it clear what he thought of Emma's approach. "The horse seems quite passive." "That's the point," Emma replied, struggling to keep frustration from her voice. "He chooses whether to engage. Forcing interaction would destroy the trust we've built." "Fascinating," the specialist remarked dryly, making notes on his tablet. "And how long do you anticipate this passive observation phase lasting before actual training begins?" "This is the training," Emma said, building a foundation of trust before asking for anything in return. Dr. Peterson exchanged a meaningful glance with Malcolm. "Most unusual. In my experience, clear establishment of hierarchy produces faster results." "I'm not looking for fast results," Emma countered. "I'm looking for healing." The inspection lasted an excruciating hour, during which Tempest remained tense and distant. When the men finally left, Emma sat in the straw and cried silently, feeling the setback like a physical pain. The colors around Tempest reflected her own emotions, murky purples of confusion and distress. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the horse. "I should have protected you better." Despite Malcolm's interference, the bond between Emma and Tempest continued to deepen. Following Martha Whitfield's advice, Emma incorporated music more deliberately into their sessions. The old guitar had belonged to Bessie, its wood worn smooth by decades of use. The first time Emma brought it into Tempest's stall, he had retreated warily, but the soft, resonant notes seemed to reach something deep within him. Now, 3 weeks into this approach, he would stand perfectly still as she played, his ears flicking in rhythm to the melodies. "My grandmother said music speaks to parts of us older than words," Emma explained to William Harrison, who had taken to observing her sessions whenever his health permitted. "Horses feel the vibrations differently than we do. They sense it through their whole bodies." William nodded, his weathered face thoughtful. "I've noticed he responds differently to different songs." "The work songs calm him most," Emma confirmed. "Bessie said they were designed to create a shared rhythm that made unbearable labor endurable. I think Tempest responds to the resilience in them." Through Martha Jenkins, Emma learned that William had been questioning Malcolm about the reduced hours and expert evaluations. Their arguments had become frequent enough that staff in the main house had taken to finding excuses to be elsewhere when father and son were both present. One evening, as Emma finished her session, finding that Tempest had allowed her to stand close enough to feel his breath on her shoulder for nearly 10 minutes, Martha delivered surprising news. "Mr. Harrison, William, has invited you to dinner at the main house tomorrow night. Formal dinner to discuss Tempest's progress." Emma's stomach clenched with anxiety. "Formal? I don't have anything appropriate to wear for a—" "Already handled," Martha interrupted with a smile. "Mrs. Whitfield dropped this off earlier. She handed Emma a garment bag, said it should fit, and to consider it an investment in your professional future." The dress inside was simple but elegant, deep blue with a modest cut that managed to be both professional and flattering. Emma had never owned anything so fine, and the thought of wearing it into the intimidating formality of the Harrison mansion filled her with dread. But she couldn't refuse William's invitation, not when he had consistently supported her work, despite Malcolm's opposition. The following evening, Emma parked her battered pickup truck behind the mansion, feeling painfully out of place among the luxury vehicles in the circular drive. She had spent an hour preparing, taming her curls into a neat updo and applying the minimal makeup she owned. The reflection in her mirror had looked like a stranger, someone who might belong in the world she was about to enter. William greeted her warmly in the grand foyer, his genuine pleasure at her arrival easing some of her tension. Malcolm, by contrast, offered a cold handshake and immediate attempt at humiliation. "Quite a transformation," he remarked, eyes raking over her dress. "Almost didn't recognize you without the stable dirt." Dinner was served in a formal dining room that could have easily seated 20, though only the 3 of them occupied the massive table. Emma concentrated on using the correct silverware, painfully aware of Malcolm's smirk each time she hesitated. As the main course was served, Malcolm launched his attack. "Tell me, Miss Conley, what's the anatomical structure of a horse's hind hoof? Specifically, the relationship between the coffin bone and the digital cushion?" Emma felt heat rising in her cheeks. The question was deliberately technical, designed to expose her lack of formal education. "I don't know the proper terminology," she admitted, meeting his gaze steadily. "But I know that when Tempest is anxious, he shifts more weight to his right foreleg, and that tells me he's remembering the accident." William nodded appreciatively. Observation over terminology. Refreshing. Malcolm wasn't deterred. "And your long-term rehabilitation plan? The specific milestones and time frame for full recovery?" "Trauma doesn't follow a convenient schedule," Emma replied. "Especially when the trauma involves betrayal by humans. Tempest will indicate when he's ready for each next step." "How charmingly intuitive," Malcolm drawled. "Meanwhile, we're feeding and housing a worthless animal with no return on investment." William set down his fork with a sharp clink against fine china. Not everything is measured in dollars, Malcolm. Some investments yield different returns. As the meal progressed, William shared his vision for the rehabilitation center more fully, explaining his plans to transform the western portion of Willowbrook into a specialized facility. "I've been revising my estate plans," he said, ignoring Malcolm's darkening expression. "I want to ensure this work continues regardless of what happens to me. Emma, I'd like you to be involved officially, perhaps as program coordinator once you've completed some formal education." Malcolm's knife scraped harshly against his plate. "Estate plans? You've been making changes to your will without consulting me?" "It's my will, son. My decisions." William's tone was gentle but firm. "I've lived my life extracting oil from the earth, destruction disguised as progress. Before I die, I'd like to build something that heals instead." The tension between father and son was palpable, but Emma found herself captivated by William's vision. He described a program that would pair traumatized horses with at-risk youth from the county, creating healing partnerships between beings who had experienced similar wounds. "Horses like Tempest have so much to teach us about resilience," William explained, his eyes bright with purpose. "And young people who've been written off by society often connect with these animals in ways that surprise everyone." By the time dessert was served, Malcolm had lapsed into cold silence, his expression calculating as he watched his father's enthusiasm. Emma recognized the dangerous colors gathering around him, the same predatory hues she'd seen on the balcony that night. As Emma prepared to leave, William drew her aside in the grand foyer. "There's something I need to show you tomorrow," he said quietly. "I'm changing my will, and I believe you should know what I'm planning for Tempest and for the future of this land." The following morning dawned crisp and clear, with mist rising from the rolling pastures of Willowbrook. Emma completed her morning duties with distracted efficiency, her mind on William's mysterious invitation. When he appeared at the stable at 10 o'clock, leaning more heavily than usual on his cane, his face was alight with purpose. "Come with me," he said, gesturing toward a golf cart parked outside. "I want to show you the future." The golf cart hummed softly as William guided it along a winding gravel path leading away from the main compound. Emma sat beside him, watching as familiar surroundings gave way to a less manicured portion of the vast Harrison property. The morning mist was burning off, revealing rolling meadows bordered by white fencing that had seen better days. After several minutes, they crested a gentle hill, and William stopped the cart. "There," he said, pointing with weathered hands toward a cluster of buildings nestled in a small valley. "The West Wing." Emma took in the scene before her, a collection of smaller stables, paddocks, and a modest two-story house, all showing signs of disuse but solid in their construction. Oak trees provided natural shade over much of the area, and a small stream meandered through the pastures. "It's beautiful," she said truthfully. William nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. 20 acres, separate from the main operation. My grandfather built these stables for his personal collection. Horses he loved, rather than horses that made money. He gestured for Emma to follow as he restarted the cart. "I haven't used this section in years, too far from the main house for my old bones to visit regularly." As they approached, Emma could see the potential beneath the neglect. Spacious stalls with good ventilation, generously sized paddocks, and natural features that could be incorporated into rehabilitation work. The house itself was modest by Harrison standards, but larger than any home Emma had ever lived in. "This could be a remarkable rehabilitation center," she said, her mind already envisioning the possibilities. "That's exactly what I intend," William replied, parking the cart in front of the main stable. "I've been revising my will to ensure this land isn't absorbed into the commercial operation after I'm gone." Inside his jacket pocket, he produced several folded papers and handed them to Emma. "This is the preliminary draft. 20 acres and the structures, plus an endowment for operational costs, designated specifically for equine rehabilitation and therapy." Emma scanned the document, her breath catching when she saw her name. "Mr. Harrison, this says that you would be the director, yes." William's eyes crinkled with gentle amusement at her shock. Contingent on your completion of proper certification, of course, which the trust would fund. Emma stared at the papers in her hands, overwhelmed by their implications. Financial security, purpose, a chance to formalize the intuitive knowledge passed down from Bessie, and most importantly, a permanent safe haven for horses like Tempest. I don't know what to say, she managed finally. You don't need to say anything. Your work with Tempest speaks for itself. William gestured toward the house. The residence would be part of the package, housing for the director, and eventually for short-term participants in the program. Emma followed him, trying to process the magnitude of what he was offering. The interior of the house was dusty but well built, with large windows overlooking the pastures. She could almost see it, as William described, a place of healing where damaged horses and humans could find their way back to trust. "Why me?" she asked finally, the question that had been burning in her mind. "You barely know me." William looked at her steadily. "I know enough. I've watched you work. I've seen what you can accomplish with patience and understanding where force and dominance failed." He paused, leaning more heavily on his cane. "Besides, I'm an old man making amends for a lifetime of taking from the earth without giving back. This land has history. Your family's history intertwined with mine in ways that weren't always just. Perhaps this is a small step toward balance." The ride back to the main compound was quiet, Emma lost in thoughts about possibilities she had never dared imagine. As they approached the stables, she noticed a group of unfamiliar people gathered near Tempest's stall, workers from neighboring farms who had come to witness the miracle they'd been hearing about. "Your reputation is spreading," William observed with a smile. "Martha tells me people have been showing up during their lunch breaks just to watch you work." Indeed, a small audience had formed. Exercise riders, grooms, even a farrier Emma recognized from the Whitfield estate. They dispersed respectfully as she approached, but their curious glances followed her. One older man tipped his hat in greeting, a simple gesture that somehow conveyed profound respect. Inside Tempest's stall, Emma found the horse watchful but calm. The colors surrounding him had stabilized into predominantly blue hues, with occasional flickers of wariness, when male voices carried from outside. His progress over the past weeks had been remarkable, though not in ways that conventional trainers would measure. He hadn't been ridden or even fully haltered, but the shift in his emotional state was evident to anyone who knew what to look for. Emma settled on her stool, guitar in hand. This had become their ritual, music first, a bridge between worlds that required no words. She began with a gentle melody, one of Bessie's work songs that seemed to resonate particularly with Tempest. As she played, she observed the subtle relaxation in his powerful body, the lowering of his head, the softening around his eyes, the steady rhythm of his breathing synchronizing with the music. "You're doing so well," she murmured between songs. "Every day, a little more healing." Tempest approached with the deliberate caution that characterized his every interaction, stopping an arm's length away. Emma continued playing, careful not to make eye contact directly, a predator's behavior in horse language. Instead, she kept her gaze soft and unfocused, allowing him the dignity of choice. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. As Emma finished a particularly haunting melody, Tempest extended his neck and gently, so gently, blew warm air against her shoulder. A horse's greeting, an acknowledgement of connection. The touch of his breath through the fabric of her shirt sent tears to her eyes. "Thank you for trusting me," she whispered, resisting the urge to reach for him. Progress came at his pace, not hers. Later that afternoon, as Emma documented the day's session in her notebook, Martha Jenkins approached with an unusual request. A local school teacher had inquired about bringing a small group of students to observe Emma's work with Tempest. "They're special education kids," Martha explained. "Their teacher thinks seeing your approach might help them understand different ways of communication." Emma hesitated, remembering how Tempest had retreated when strangers disrupted their routine. "I'm not sure he's ready for a group." They would observe from outside, very quietly, Martha assured her. The teacher understands the sensitivity. After careful consideration, Emma agreed to a brief controlled visit. If Tempest showed any signs of distress, the students would leave immediately. The following day, 5 children ranging from 10 to 12 years old arrived with their teacher, Ms. Reynolds. Emma was struck by the careful preparation the teacher had obviously done. The children spoke in whispers, moved slowly, and positioned themselves at a respectful distance from Tempest's stall. Emma explained her approach in simple terms. Tempest had bad experiences that made him afraid. Instead of telling him what to do, I show him he can make choices. Trust builds when we respect each other's boundaries. The children watched with remarkable focus as Emma demonstrated her gentle techniques, sitting quietly, using music to create connection, allowing Tempest to approach or retreat as he chose. One boy, whose teacher later explained was seldom verbal due to autism, whispered to his aide, "The horse is like me. He doesn't like when people get too close too fast." The observation struck Emma profoundly. Perhaps William's vision of connecting traumatized horses with children who understood difference wasn't just idealistic. It was precisely what both needed. As word spread about Emma's success with Tempest, support from unexpected quarters began to emerge. Workers from other farms brought her small offerings, especially woven lead rope, herbs for Tempest that grew on their land, a handcrafted stool to replace her overturned bucket. Each gift came with stories about horses they had known or worked with, problems they had encountered, questions about her methods. Sheriff Coleman became a regular visitor, often bringing coffee and sitting quietly outside Tempest's stall while Emma worked. His presence provided a subtle layer of protection, a reminder to Malcolm that Emma wasn't without allies. "People are watching what you're doing here," Coleman told her during one such visit. "Not just with the horse, but standing your ground against Malcolm Harrison means something to folks around here to see that." Emma hadn't thought of her work in those terms, as resistance against power, but she recognized the truth in his words. In a county where the wealthy still largely controlled the fates of the working class, her quiet insistence on a different approach represented more than just horse training. The morning after a particularly productive session where Tempest had allowed Emma to touch his neck for nearly a minute, she arrived at the stables to find Malcolm waiting for her. The colors surrounding him were sharper than usual, agitated reds and calculating grays that set her immediately on edge. "My father's making a mistake," he said without preamble. "This center he's planning, it's financial suicide, sentimental charity with no viable business model." Emma kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Harrison believes in the project. My father believes in fairy tales and redemption." Malcolm sneered. "I deal in reality. And the reality is that this property will be under different management eventually." The threat hung between them, unspoken but clear. Emma maintained her composure, though her heart raced. "If you'll excuse me, I need to start my session with Tempest." Malcolm stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that reminded her uncomfortably of intimidation tactics she'd seen used against nervous horses. "You've gotten awfully comfortable here, haven't you? Playing savior to a broken animal, worming your way into an old man's sympathies." Before Emma could respond, Martha Jenkins called from across the yard, breaking the tension. Malcolm stepped back, his cold smile returning. "Enjoy your position while it lasts, Ms. Conley. Things change quickly in this business." That evening, Emma shared her concerns with Lisa Martinez, who had become a regular ally in her work with Tempest. The young woman's expression darkened as Emma recounted Malcolm's veiled threats. "He's getting desperate," Lisa observed. "With the evidence we've gathered about his involvement in the doping scandal and now his father changing the will, he's running out of options." They had been systematically documenting connections between Malcolm and Vincent Morelli, the trainer responsible for drugging Tempest. Lisa's persistent research had uncovered financial transactions, witness statements, and even photographs that established Malcolm's knowledge of the illegal doping program. Together, they had provided this information to Sheriff Coleman, who was building a case carefully, aware that rushing against someone of Malcolm's power could backfire. "We should take this to your father," Lisa suggested, referring to William. With everything we know now, he needs to understand exactly who he's dealing with. Emma nodded reluctantly. The confrontation was inevitable, but she dreaded being the messenger who would shatter an already strained relationship between father and son. The decision was made for her the following morning. When Emma arrived at the stables, she found chaos. Emergency vehicles with flashing lights, stable hands gathered in concerned clusters, Martha Jenkins white-faced with shock. "What happened?" Emma demanded, her heart pounding. "It's Mr. Harrison," Martha replied, her voice shaking. "He collapsed in his study last night. They're saying it might be his heart." Emma felt the world tilt sideways. William, kind, visionary William, hospitalized just as his plans for the rehabilitation center were taking shape. The timing was too convenient, too aligned with Malcolm's increasingly desperate behavior. "Who found him?" she asked, a terrible suspicion forming. "Malcolm," Martha answered. "He said he went to discuss business and found his father unconscious." Emma exchanged a meaningful look with Sheriff Coleman, who had just arrived on the scene. The unspoken question hung between them. Collapse? Or something more sinister? Late that night, when Emma finally returned home after spending hours at the hospital waiting for news, she found her door ajar. Heart pounding, she pushed it open to discover her home had been ransacked. Drawers emptied, furniture overturned, and most disturbing of all, a message scrawled on her living room wall. "Some horses can't be saved. Some people can't either." Emma stood frozen in the doorway of her ransacked home, the threatening message on her wall sending chills through her body. Someone had violated her sanctuary, her only safe place in a world that had become increasingly dangerous. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone to call Sheriff Coleman. Within 20 minutes, the sheriff's cruiser pulled into her driveway, lights flashing silently. Coleman surveyed the damage with a grim expression, taking photographs and making notes while Emma hugged herself, trying to process the violation. "You can't stay here tonight," he said finally, closing his notebook. "Not safe." "I don't have anywhere else to go," Emma replied, exhaustion washing over her. The hospital vigil for William Harrison followed by this invasion had left her emotionally drained. Coleman considered for a moment before saying, "My sister has a spare room, just for tonight while we secure your place." But as Emma began gathering essentials, her phone rang. Martha Whitfield's crisp voice came through the line. "Emma, dear, Sheriff Coleman called me about your situation. There's no question about it. You'll stay with me until this is resolved." 2 hours later, Emma found herself in a guest suite at Whitfield Manor that was larger than her entire house. The elderly aristocrat had insisted, brushing aside Emma's protests with a wave of her hand. "Nonsense. This house has 12 bedrooms and only one old woman. Besides, whoever did this to your home would think twice before trying anything on my property. The Whitfield name still means something in this county." As Emma settled into the unfamiliar luxury of Egyptian cotton sheets and antique furniture, Martha sat in a wingback chair by the window, her silver hair gleaming in the lamplight. "This isn't random vandalism," the older woman stated. "This is Malcolm sending a message. He knows you've been gathering evidence against him, and with his father incapacitated, he's making his move." Emma nodded wearily. "The timing is too convenient. William changes his will to include the rehabilitation center, and suddenly he collapses. Malcolm Harrison wouldn't be the first son to grow impatient with his inheritance," Martha replied darkly. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow we plan our counteroffensive." Sleep came fitfully, but when Emma woke the next morning, a strange calm had settled over her. The fear remained, but alongside it grew a quiet determination. She hadn't survived losing her parents, nearly losing her home, and years of struggling just to be intimidated now. Not when Tempest and potentially William Harrison himself needed her. After breakfast, Martha drove Emma to the hospital where William remained under observation. His condition had stabilized. A heart attack, the doctor said, though not a major one. Emma couldn't help wondering if something or someone had triggered it. "He's asking for you," the nurse informed Emma when she arrived. "Been quite insistent." William looked diminished against the white hospital sheets, his robust frame suddenly frail, but his eyes lit up when Emma entered. "There you are," he said, his voice weaker but spirit unbroken. "They tell me I need to reduce stress. Apparently arguing with my son about the future of Willowbrook isn't considered therapeutic." Emma smiled despite her worry. "You gave us quite a scare, Mr. Harrison." "William, please. I think we're past formalities." He gestured toward a chair. "Sit. Tell me about Tempest. Has Malcolm interfered with your work in my absence?" "Not yet," Emma replied cautiously. "But there have been developments." She told him about the break-in at her home, the threatening message. William's expression darkened with each detail. "This ends now," he said firmly. "I've suspected for some time that Malcolm's opposition to your work with Tempest goes beyond financial concerns. There's something personal in it." "There is," Emma confirmed, and carefully explained what she and Lisa Martinez had discovered about Malcolm's connection to the doping scandal that had traumatized Tempest and killed Daniel Martinez. William listened without interruption, his weathered face growing increasingly grave. When Emma finished, he was silent for several long moments. "I've made many mistakes with my son," he finally said, "indulged his worst instincts, looked the other way when I should have confronted him. But this," he shook his head slowly, "this goes beyond anything I imagined." Before Emma left, William made a decision. "I'm accelerating the changes to my will. Today. My lawyer will be here this afternoon. The rehabilitation center will be established immediately, with you as interim director, until you complete your certification." 2 days later, Emma returned to her home, now secured with new locks and a security system, courtesy of Martha Whitfield. Sheriff Coleman had increased patrols past her property, and several neighbors had volunteered to keep watch, the community closing ranks around one of their own who had been threatened. The prestigious Kentucky Horse Festival was approaching, bringing buyers, breeders, and racing enthusiasts from across the country to Shelbyville. Normally a celebration of the region's equine heritage, this year's festival carried additional tension for Emma. Malcolm had announced that Tempest would be presented during the festival's showcase of exceptional thoroughbreds. "He can't do that," Emma protested to Martha Jenkins when she heard the news. "Tempest isn't ready for that kind of environment. The crowds, the noise, the pressure." "Malcolm insists it's necessary to justify the investment," Martha replied unhappily. "He says $5 million shouldn't be hidden in a back stable while we play therapy." Emma found Malcolm in the main office, reviewing preparations for the festival. His cold smile when she entered told her he'd been expecting this confrontation. "Mr. Harrison, Tempest isn't ready for public exhibition," she began without preamble. "The festival environment would trigger his trauma responses. All our progress could be undone." Malcolm leaned back in his leather chair, studying her with calculated amusement. "How fortunate that I didn't ask for your opinion, Ms. Conley. Tempest will be presented at the festival. End of discussion. Your father wouldn't approve of this." "My father isn't currently in charge," Malcolm replied smoothly. "His medical team has recommended minimal stress during recovery, which means I'm making operational decisions." Emma tried another approach. "At least let me prepare him properly. I could work with him in gradually more stimulating environments, introduce him to small groups first." "What an excellent suggestion," Malcolm interrupted with false enthusiasm. "In fact, I've arranged something special, a demonstration of Tempest's progress, or lack thereof, for key investors tomorrow afternoon. I expect you to have him ready." The trap was obvious. Malcolm was setting her up to fail, creating conditions under which Tempest would almost certainly react badly, providing justification for more drastic measures. "And if I refuse to participate?" Emma asked, already knowing the answer. Malcolm's smile vanished. "Then you're terminated immediately, banned from the property, and I find someone more cooperative to handle that horse. Someone who understands the economic reality of this business." That evening, Emma worked with Tempest later than usual, trying desperately to prepare him for what was coming. The horse sensed her anxiety. The colors around him flickered with responsive tension, his movements more restless than they'd been in weeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered, sitting cross-legged in his stall with her guitar. "I'm trying to protect you, but I don't know if I can." She played for hours, choosing the melodies that seemed to calm him most. Gradually, Tempest's agitation eased, and he settled into the familiar rhythm of their connection. He approached closer than ever before, standing directly beside her, his massive body radiating heat in the cool evening air. When Emma finally stopped playing, emotionally exhausted, Tempest did something unprecedented. He lowered his great head and rested it lightly against her shoulder for the briefest moment. The gesture broke something inside her. Tears flowed freely as she whispered, "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember this. Remember that someone understood you." The following day brought exactly the scenario Emma had feared. Malcolm had arranged for a group of potential investors to observe a special demonstration of Tempest's rehabilitation. The men arrived in expensive suits and polished boots, carrying an air of entitled expertise that set Emma's teeth on edge. "Gentlemen," Malcolm announced grandly, "you've heard about our challenging project, the rehabilitation of Tempest, once the greatest thoroughbred in Kentucky, now recovering from trauma. Ms. Conley here has been using some unconventional methods." The way he emphasized unconventional made it sound like worthless. Emma ignored the jab and focused on Tempest, who was already showing signs of distress at the presence of so many unfamiliar men. "I'll need everyone to maintain distance and speak quietly," she requested, keeping her voice calm despite her racing heart. One investor scoffed audibly. $5 million of horseflesh and we can't get close? What exactly have you accomplished in these months of therapy? Emma recognized the setup but proceeded anyway, demonstrating the quiet techniques she'd developed with Tempest. The music, the patient presence, the absence of force or demand. Under normal circumstances, the horse would have responded with the cautious trust they'd built. But with 6 strange men crowding the stable corridor, their voices too loud, their movements too sudden, Tempest retreated to the back of his stall, the colors around him flaring with distress. "This is your progress?" Malcolm asked incredulously. "He won't even approach you now?" "He's overwhelmed," Emma explained, trying to remain professional. "Too many new people, too much pressure." "Seems to me you've accomplished nothing," one investor remarked dismissively. "A racehorse that can't be handled isn't a racehorse, it's a liability." The demonstration continued disastrously. Every technique Emma attempted was undermined by the inappropriate environment Malcolm had deliberately created. By the end, Tempest was visibly agitated, and the investors were unimpressed. "Enough," Malcolm finally declared. "I think we've seen all we need to. Thank you for your time, gentlemen. Perhaps we should discuss more traditional approaches over drinks." As the group departed, Malcolm lingered behind. "Effective immediately, you're banned from Tempest's stall. We'll be bringing in professionals who can show actual results." Emma felt as though the ground had dropped from beneath her feet. "You can't do that. Your father—" "My father isn't here," Malcolm snapped. "Security will escort you off the property. Don't come back." That evening, as rain began to fall over Shelbyville, Emma sat in Martha Whitfield's study, devastated. She had failed Tempest when he needed her most. "He set you up," Martha said firmly, pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal glasses. "Created conditions guaranteed to trigger the horse's worst responses." "It doesn't matter," Emma replied, her voice hollow. "I can't help Tempest if I can't reach him." "Then we find another way," Martha declared, handing Emma a glass. "This isn't over." At Willowbrook Farm, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Martha Jenkins called Emma the following morning with alarming news. Tempest had refused food and water since Emma's departure. The horse stood motionless in his stall, staring fixedly at the door, as if waiting for someone who never came. "The vet is concerned," Martha reported. "Says he could become dangerously dehydrated if this continues." For 2 agonizing days, Emma received updates from sympathetic staff members. Tempest's condition worsened. No food, minimal water, a dejected stillness that frightened even experienced handlers. When the veterinarian warned that the horse might die if the situation continued, William Harrison, still recovering in the hospital, finally intervened. His call to Malcolm was brief and absolute. "Bring Emma Conley back immediately, or I'll have my lawyer transfer ownership of Tempest to her today. Your choice." When she returned, the reunion was everything Emma had feared and hoped for. As she approached his stall in the pouring rain, Tempest raised his head for the first time in days. A sound emerged from his throat, a nickering greeting that made seasoned stable hands turn in astonishment. The powerful, traumatized animal who had attacked anyone who approached him now pressed against the stall door, seeking connection with the one human who had earned his trust. That afternoon, with rain drumming on the stable roof, Emma demonstrated for William Harrison and a small group of festival organizers what genuine healing looked like. Inside Tempest's stall, with no equipment beyond a simple lead rope, she extended her hand. The magnificent horse, who had been written off as dangerous, damaged beyond repair, lowered his head and pressed his forehead against her palm in a gesture of absolute trust. While the paramedics rushed William Harrison to the hospital and police officers handcuffed Malcolm, Sheriff Coleman pulled Emma aside. "I've never seen a horse do something like that," as if he understood exactly what was happening, he said in amazement, to which Emma replied with tears in her eyes. He understood. Tempest knows how to recognize when someone is being hurt by the person who should be protecting them. He understood. Tempest knows how to recognize when someone is being hurt by the person who should be protecting them. Emma's words hung in the air, laden with meaning that extended far beyond the immediate drama unfolding at Willowbrook Farm. Sheriff Coleman nodded slowly, his weathered face solemn as he processed the implications of what they had just witnessed. The scene around them was chaos contained, paramedics loading William Harrison into an ambulance, his face pale but conscious. Officers securing Malcolm Harrison in the back of a patrol car, his expression a dangerous mixture of rage and calculation. Stable hands and festival visitors murmuring in shocked clusters, trying to make sense of what had happened. But amidst the commotion, Tempest stood unnaturally still in the center of the garden where he had intervened, his massive frame quivering slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline. The color surrounding him pulsed with an intensity Emma had never seen before. Not the sickly yellow-green of fear or the sharp red of aggression, but a deep, resolute indigo that seemed to radiate purpose. "What happens now?" Emma asked quietly, her hand resting on Tempest's sweaty neck, feeling the powerful muscles still tense beneath her fingers. "Now we follow procedure," Coleman replied, his voice shifting to official tones. "Mr. Harrison, William, will be evaluated at the hospital. Malcolm will be processed and held pending charges. As for what happened here," he gestured toward Tempest, "I've never seen anything like it in 27 years of law enforcement." The events had unfolded with a precision that seemed almost orchestrated. Emma, returning to the stables after her forced absence, had been leading Tempest around the small paddock adjacent to his stall when shouting erupted from the main house. Through the rain-washed air, she had glimpsed Malcolm leading his father onto the second-floor balcony, the same balcony where she had witnessed their confrontation weeks earlier. Even from a distance, the body language was unmistakable. Malcolm aggressive, William defensive. When Malcolm grabbed his father's shoulders, Emma had frozen in horror. But Tempest had acted. With the explosive burst of speed, he had broken free from her loose hold on his lead rope and galloped toward the house, positioning himself precisely beneath the balcony, just as William was pushed against the railing and began to fall. The impact had been significant. William still landed hard enough to cause serious injury, but Tempest's massive body had broken the worst of the fall. Then, with extraordinary precision, the horse had wheeled and struck Malcolm with his shoulder as the younger Harrison rushed down the exterior stairs, knocking him down without trampling him, keeping him pinned until security and then police arrived. "I need your statement, officially," Coleman continued, pulling Emma back to the present. "But that can wait until tomorrow. Right now, that animal needs your attention." Emma nodded, grateful for the sheriff's understanding. Tempest was standing still, but his eyes were too wide, his breathing too shallow, signs of shock that required immediate attention. With gentle murmurs, she began leading him back toward his stall, away from the continuing commotion. Inside the quiet stable, Emma moved with deliberate calmness, her voice a steady stream of reassurance. "You did something extraordinary, boy, something impossible, but now we need to bring you back to earth." Tempest's muscles remained rigid, his senses clearly overwhelmed by the intensity of what had transpired. Emma recognized the dangerous precipice. Trauma responses could be reinforced by extreme events, even those with positive outcomes. The colors around him flickered erratically, indigo purpose giving way to confused purples and agitated oranges. She reached for her guitar, which had become an extension of their communication. The familiar opening notes of Bessie's work songs filled the stall, vibrating through the wooden floor and into Tempest's body. For several minutes, he remained motionless, processing. Then gradually, his head lowered an inch, then another. His nostrils flared with deeper breaths. The dangerous rigidity in his frame began to soften. "That's it," Emma encouraged softly between verses. "Come back to yourself. Come back to now." When Martha Jenkins appeared at the stall door an hour later, her face still showing the shock of the afternoon's events, Tempest had settled into a quieter state, not entirely calm, but present rather than dissociated. "They've taken William to Shelby County General," Martha reported. "Malcolm's been booked at the county jail. The official charge is attempted murder, but they're adding assault and battery, elder abuse, and half a dozen financial crimes." Emma nodded, continuing to stroke Tempest's neck as she spoke. "Have you heard anything about William's condition? Broken hip, broken arm, contusions? Serious for a man his age, but not immediately life-threatening." Martha's voice lowered. "The doctors are saying if he had fallen directly onto the stone patio from that height at his age, it would have been fatal." The reality of what Tempest had done, what he had somehow known to do, settled over Emma like a physical weight. This wasn't just a horse responding to a threatening situation. This was calculation, recognition, and purposeful intervention. "He remembered," Emma said softly, meeting Tempest's deep brown eyes. "He remembered Malcolm pushing William that first night. He understood it was happening again." Martha's expression reflected wonder mixed with healthy skepticism. "Emma, that would mean—" "I know what it would mean," Emma interrupted gently. "That he's more than we've allowed ourselves to believe animals can be. That he comprehends cause and effect, recognizes patterns, and can make moral judgments." The implications were too enormous to fully process in the aftermath of such drama. Instead, Emma focused on the immediate needs before her, keeping Tempest stable, processing her own shock, and preparing for the legal storm that would surely follow. That storm began the very next morning. Emma had spent the night in the small room adjacent to Tempest's stall, unwilling to leave him alone after such an extraordinary event. She was awakened at dawn by Martha Jenkins, her expression grim. "Malcolm's lawyers are here," she announced without preamble. "They're demanding Tempest be declared a dangerous animal and destroyed immediately." Emma was on her feet instantly, adrenaline washing away exhaustion. "On what grounds?" "They're claiming he attacked 2 people without provocation, causing serious bodily harm." Martha's disgust was evident. "They've already filed emergency papers with the county court. There's a hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning." "That's absurd," Emma protested. "He saved William's life. There were dozens of witnesses who saw Malcolm push his father. Doesn't matter to Malcolm's legal team. They're spinning it as an uncontrollable animal attacking the Harrisons during a private family discussion." Martha's voice hardened. "Malcolm knows that Tempest is evidence against him, both of the attempted murder and potentially of the doping scandal. As long as the horse lives, he's a threat." Emma's mind raced. Without William's protection, Tempest was vulnerable. Malcolm still controlled significant Harrison assets and had connections throughout the county. A quick legal maneuver to have Tempest declared dangerous and euthanized would eliminate a key witness and provide a final act of revenge. "We need legal representation," Emma said firmly. Someone who can match Malcolm's team. Already handling it, came a crisp voice from the stable entrance. Martha Whitfield stood there, elegant despite the early hour, a younger man in an expensive suit beside her. This is Christopher Bennett, one of the top animal rights attorneys in the state. He'll be representing Tempest's interests. The young attorney stepped forward, extending his hand. Ms. Conley, Mrs. Whitfield has briefed me on the extraordinary circumstances. We have work to do before tomorrow's hearing, but I believe we have a strong case. Throughout the day, Emma divided her attention between caring for Tempest, who remained unusually subdued after his extraordinary exertion, and working with Bennett to prepare for the hearing. The attorney interviewed witnesses, collected statements, and built a timeline that clearly demonstrated Tempest's actions were not random aggression, but targeted intervention. The burden is on Malcolm's team to prove Tempest is inherently dangerous, Bennett explained during a strategy session. We have dozens of witnesses who saw him deliberately position himself to break William's fall, then restrain Malcolm without causing serious injury. That level of control actually proves the opposite of their claim. By evening, word of the emergency hearing had spread throughout Shelbyville. Emma was startled when Martha Jenkins reported that people were gathering outside the Harrison property, not protesters demanding Tempest's destruction, but supporters bringing food for the stable staff, offering to stand witness at the hearing, some even holding handmade signs reading, "Justice for Tempest" and "Heroes come in all species." "They're standing with you," Martha explained, her eyes misting slightly. "The whole community knows what Malcolm tried to do, and what Tempest prevented." That night, as Emma sat with Tempest in his stall, she felt the weight of tomorrow's hearing pressing down. The horse seemed to sense her anxiety, standing closer than usual, occasionally lowering his head to breathe softly against her hair. "I won't let them hurt you," she promised, running her hands along his powerful neck. "Not after everything you've survived. Not after what you did." A soft knock on the stall door interrupted her thoughts. Sheriff Coleman stood there, his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "Thought you should know," he said quietly. William Harrison regained consciousness about an hour ago. First thing he did was ask about Tempest. When they told him what happened, he insisted on making a statement. Coleman's weathered face broke into a rare smile. Said, and I quote, "That horse is a better judge of character than most people I know. He stays with Emma Conley no matter what my son's lawyers try to pull." Relief washed through Emma. William's testimony would be crucial in tomorrow's hearing. "Is he able to appear?" "Doctors say no, but they've agreed to a video statement. I recorded it myself, all official-like. It's powerful, Emma. Very powerful." As Coleman turned to leave, he hesitated. "One more thing. The video surveillance from the house caught everything. Malcolm pushing his father, Tempest's intervention. It's clearer than any eyewitness could be." For the first time since this nightmare began, Emma felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. They had a fighting chance. The county courthouse was packed the next morning. It seemed half of Shelbyville had turned out for the emergency hearing. Emma, dressed in the best clothes she owned, which still marked her clearly as working class among the suits and judicial robes, sat beside Christopher Bennett at the respondents' table. Across the aisle, Malcolm's legal team, 3 attorneys from a prestigious Louisville firm, arranged papers with confident efficiency. Malcolm himself was notably absent, still in county jail awaiting bail proceedings. The atmosphere shifted dramatically when the courtroom doors opened and a frail, elderly woman entered, supported by a nurse. Martha Whitfield, at 84, had rarely been seen in public in recent years. Her appearance caused a ripple of whispers throughout the gallery. With regal dignity, she made her way to Emma's side, settling beside her with a reassuring pat on the young woman's hand. "I've known 8 generations of judges in this courthouse," she whispered. "The current one was my second cousin's grandson. Let's see if family still means something in Shelby County." "My son tried to kill me for money," declared William Harrison's voice from the large screen at the front of the courtroom, his bruised face solemn and dignified despite his hospital bed. "But this horse and this young woman saved me through compassion. That tells me everything I need to know about true value." The courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered his ruling. The evidence had been overwhelming. William Harrison's testimony, the surveillance footage, and the professional assessments of Tempest's behavior all pointed to the same conclusion. This was not a dangerous animal, but an extraordinary one who had acted with purpose and precision to save a human life. The court denies the petition to classify the thoroughbred Tempest as a dangerous animal, the judge declared, his gavel striking with finality. Furthermore, temporary custody is granted to Emma Conley pending resolution of the criminal proceedings against Malcolm Harrison. 3 months later, Emma stood in the early morning light, watching contractors transform the west wing of Willowbrook Farm. Scaffolding surrounded the old stable buildings, and the sound of hammers and saws filled the air. What had once been a neglected corner of the Harrison property was rapidly becoming the center for equine healing that William had envisioned. William himself, now using a wheelchair for longer distances but recovering steadily, rolled up beside her on the gravel path. At 78, he had lost some of his robust appearance, but his eyes remained sharp and determined. "They're ahead of schedule," he noted with satisfaction. "Should be ready for the first group by early spring." Emma nodded, still sometimes overwhelmed by how quickly life had changed. In the aftermath of Malcolm's attempted murder, William had accelerated his plans, legally separating the West Wing property from the main Harrison holdings and establishing the foundation that would fund the center's operations. With Malcolm now awaiting trial on multiple charges, not only the attempted murder but also financial crimes uncovered during the investigation, William had been free to implement his vision without opposition. "I've been reviewing the applications," Emma said, turning to face her mentor. 5 teenagers for our pilot program, all with different backgrounds, different traumas, but I see something in each of them that might connect with what we're doing here. William smiled. "Your instincts haven't failed us yet. Tell me about them." "There's Jamal," Emma began. 15, raised in foster care since he was 7, witnessed severe domestic violence before being removed from his home. Hasn't spoken more than a few words at a time for years, but his social worker says he draws pictures of horses constantly. She continued, describing each teenager she'd selected. Tanya, a 17-year-old black girl from Louisville whose promising athletic career ended with a car accident that left her with chronic pain. Miguel, the 14-year-old son of migrant workers who had been caught in an ICE raid that separated him from his parents for months. Sarah, a 16-year-old white girl from Appalachia whose family lost everything to opioid addiction. And Deshaun, a 16-year-old boy from inner-city Cincinnati who had survived a school shooting 2 years earlier. They've all been labeled difficult cases by the system, Emma concluded. All have trust issues, anger issues, withdrawal symptoms. Traditional therapy hasn't reached them. William nodded thoughtfully. "And which horses will you pair them with?" "I'm still deciding, but Tempest will be central to the program for all of them." Emma glanced toward the paddock where the magnificent black thoroughbred now grazed peacefully. "He's not just a success story, he's a teacher." The transformation in Tempest over the past months had been remarkable. Once the legal battles ended and stability returned, he had progressed rapidly. Emma had continued her patient approach, but Tempest now sought connection rather than merely tolerating it. He allowed himself to be groomed, accepted a light saddle, and most remarkably, had begun showing curiosity about other horses and humans. "These kids have been broken by the same system that tried to break him," Emma explained as they moved toward the paddock. "They don't need more force or control in their lives. They need someone who sees them as they are, respects their pain, and has patience to wait until they're ready to trust again." The following weeks were a flurry of preparation. Emma divided her time between continuing Tempest's rehabilitation, overseeing the construction of the center's facilities, and developing the program curriculum. With Martha Whitfield's guidance, she incorporated formal elements of equine therapy with the intuitive methods she had learned from Bessie and discovered on her own. 2 additional horses joined the program, a nervous Appaloosa mare rescued from neglect, and an older gelding who had been retired from jumping after an injury. Like Tempest, they had stories of trauma written in their behavior, making them perfect partners for teenagers who would recognize their own pain reflected back. On a crisp April morning, the Center for Equine Healing Conley Harrison officially opened its doors. The ceremony was small but significant. William in his wheelchair cutting a ribbon across the newly renovated main stable entrance. Martha Whitfield representing the county's equestrian community, Sheriff Coleman and several local officials in attendance. Most importantly, 5 teenagers stood awkwardly to one side, their expressions ranging from suspicious to merely bored, clearly expecting another institutional program that would fail them. "This isn't like other programs you might have experienced," Emma explained to the group as she led them into the main stable after the ceremony. "We don't have a rigid schedule of activities or a checklist of behaviors to fix. What we have is time, space, and these horses, all of whom have experienced trauma like many of you have." Jamal, the silent boy with watchful eyes, startled visibly when Emma added, "These animals aren't here to be controlled or mastered. They're here to be partners. And the first rule of partnership is consent. They get to choose whether to engage with you, just as you get to choose whether to engage with them." That first day established the foundation of Emma's approach. Rather than assigning each teenager a horse or imposing structured activities, she simply introduced them to the space and the animals, allowing natural curiosity to develop. Some, like Miguel, were immediately drawn to the horses, while others, like Tanya, maintained a careful distance, observing from the edges. Tempest, now comfortable with Emma's presence beside him in the paddock without restraints, watched the newcomers with alert interest. The color surrounding him had stabilized into confident blues and purples, still cautious around strangers but no longer dominated by fear. "This is Tempest," Emma said simply when the group gathered by the paddock fence. "His story is complicated, but the short version is that people he trusted hurt him badly, and for a long time, he couldn't trust anyone again. Some people wanted to give up on him, said he was too damaged, too dangerous. But we found another way." Deshawn, whose tough exterior barely concealed his hypervigilance, scoffed audibly. "It's just a horse. It doesn't know what happened to it." "Maybe," Emma acknowledged. "Or maybe he remembers everything but doesn't have words for it. Either way, his body remembers, just like yours does." The comment landed with visible impact on several of the teenagers. Sarah, the quiet girl from Appalachia, spoke for the first time. "Does he let people ride him?" "Sometimes," Emma replied, "but only when he chooses. Here, partnership means we respect each other's boundaries. No one gets on Tempest's back unless he invites them." "How do you know if a horse is inviting you?" Miguel asked, his accent thickening with interest. Emma smiled. "That's what you'll be learning here. How to listen to what isn't said out loud." Over the following weeks, the program unfolded organically. Emma provided structure without rigidity, guidance without force. The teenagers learned basic horsemanship, grooming, feeding, understanding equine body language. But more importantly, they learned to be present, to observe, and to respect boundaries both equine and human. The breakthrough came unexpectedly in the 3rd week. A new horse had arrived the previous day, a thoroughbred named Monarch, who had been abused by a trainer known for harsh methods before being abandoned when he stopped performing. The animal was in worse psychological condition than even Tempest had been, trembling constantly, refusing food, attacking anyone who approached. Emma had placed him in a quiet stall away from the main activity, planning to work with him privately before introducing him to the program. But Jamal, who had spoken perhaps 10 words total since arriving, had noticed the new arrival. During the lunch break, he slipped away from the group and made his way to the isolation stall. When Emma realized he was missing and found him, her initial panic gave way to amazement. Jamal sat cross-legged on the ground outside Monarch's stall, not looking directly at the horse, but simply existing in his presence. The traumatized animal, instead of retreating to the far corner, as he had with everyone else, stood watching the boy with cautious interest. "He has the same eyes my mom had," Jamal said quietly when Emma approached, his voice rusty from disuse. "When my stepdad would start yelling before he hit her, like he's waiting for the bad thing he knows is coming." In that moment, something profound shifted in the program. The teenagers weren't just learning from Emma and the horses. They were beginning to recognize and articulate their own trauma through the mirror of the animal's experiences. Jamal, who had been unreachable through years of conventional therapy, had found his voice because he recognized something familiar in Monarch's fear. By the time the 6-week pilot program concluded, the transformation in both the teenagers and the horses was remarkable. Each young person had formed a connection with at least one of the animals, learning to communicate through presence rather than dominance. Even more significantly, they had begun connecting with each other, sharing insights and observations about the horses that gradually evolved into cautious discussions of their own experiences. The formal opening ceremony for the fully operational center took place on a perfect Kentucky spring morning, with dignitaries from across the state in attendance. William Harrison, now able to stand with the assistance of a cane, beamed with pride as Emma and her 5 pioneer students prepared to demonstrate what they had learned. The spectators fell silent as the stable doors opened and 6 figures emerged. Emma and the 5 teenagers, each walking beside a horse. No saddles, no bridles, only thin ropes loosely draped around the horses' necks as symbolic guides. The animals moved in perfect synchronization with their human partners, responding to subtle body language that most observers couldn't even detect. In the center of the group, Jamal walked beside Monarch, the once terrified horse now carrying himself with newfound dignity. At the lead, Emma and Tempest moved as one entity, embodying the partnership that had inspired the entire program. In 50 years in the oil business, I never saw anything as valuable as what happens here, William confessed to Martha Whitfield, who had become a regular presence at the center. Tears glistened in the old man's eyes as he watched Emma guide the procession around the demonstration ring with quiet confidence. Years passed, and the center's reputation grew. Horses considered beyond hope were brought from across the country. Young people rejected by traditional systems found purpose and healing in the programs Emma developed. With William's encouragement, she completed her formal education in equine behavior and psychology, combining academic knowledge with the intuitive wisdom inherited from Bessie. Malcolm, serving time for attempted murder and financial crimes, refused all offers of reconciliation. But Emma visited William daily, becoming the daughter he had never had, learning about management and business to ensure the center's continuation after his eventual passing. 10 years after that first fateful encounter between Emma and Tempest, visitors to the Conley Harrison Equine Center were greeted by a sight that captured the essence of the entire journey. Emma, now a confident woman of 29, and Tempest, an aging but proud horse, walking side by side through Kentucky's verdant fields. No ropes, no commands, just 2 friends who had healed each other, who had found freedom in shared trust. "You are the whispers in the grass," Emma told new young people who arrived at the program each year, pointing to the horses grazing freely. "When everyone else hears only storms and thunder, you are those who can hear the whispers. And sometimes, in the whispers, we find the most important truths."